Hello, everyone. My name is Allison Wilmore. I am a film critic at New York Magazine, and it is my great pleasure to introduce filmmaker Kiyoshi Kurosawa joining us over Zoom from Japan, where it is his birthday. So, your 2001 film, Pulse, is still, I think, one of the greatest films that I've ever seen in terms of evoking how the internet can really magnify our capacity for alienation. And I was curious in making a film set in the present day that deals with some similar themes, what you saw as the most seismic changes. The internet was really in its early days in 2001.
はい。まずは皆さん、本日はお越しいただいてありがとうございます。そこに、その場所に行く予定だったんですけど、ちょっと都合が悪くて行けなくて申し訳ありませんでした。こうやって、今、日本からズームで、お話しさせていただいております。黒沢です。よろしくお願いします。
First, I just want to thank everyone for attending today. I was supposed to be there in person, and unfortunately, I was not able to make it. So I'm joining you from Japan over Zoom. But thank you all for coming.
あの、そうですね、パルスの時もインターネットを題材にしたんですけど、あの時はもう20、25年ぐらい前ですから、うん、非常に不可解な、不思議な、何か新しい、でも、奥に底知れない謎が潜んでいるような、装置としてインターネットを使いました。ただ、今日では、さすがに僕も、もうインターネット毎日使っておりますし、ごくありふれた日常のものとして、みんな、それがあることに気にも留めず、もう空気のように、いつも存在しているものとして、インターネットに触れていると思っています。
So when I went making Pulse, indeed, I was thinking about the theme of the internet, but that was already 25 years ago. And at the time, I was using it as a device that was strange and new, but still contained many mysteries within its depths. Today, I, for instance, use the internet every day. I think of it as a very ordinary thing. We don't think about how we use the internet. It's ever present, just like air. I think that's the biggest difference.
ただ、そうですね、あまりにもありふれている分、その、恐ろしさというか、インターネットというものの、うーミステリアスな部分というのはもうなんか忘れ去られていて、より怖いなという気がしています。つまり、ご存知のように、ほんのささやかな人間の心の中にあるものっていうのを、ものすごくインターネットは拡大したり、あるいはそれを集めて、巨大なものにしたりする力が、あると思います。それがいい方向に使えれば、それは素晴らしいものになるんでしょうが、ちょっとした人間の悪意みたいなものが集結すると、ものすごい、力になってしまう。昔、今もそれは変わらないんですけども、あまりにも普通にある分、その恐ろしさというものに誰も気づかなくなっているっていうところは、怖いなという気は、より昔より怖いなという気はしています。
But the fact that it has become so ever-present and ordinary has also made it much scarier. It's as if we've forgotten about the mysteries of the internet, and that has made it more dangerous. For instance, even small things that we are feeling within us can become enlarged and heightened over the internet. All of these kinds of emotions can also be collected and concentrated to make something very big. If only the internet were used for good, that would be great, but it's also a way that evil can kind of become concentrated to become a huge power. And so I think that aspect of it being such an everyday thing that we interface with is quite dangerous.
How did you find this world of online resellers? And what was it about this particular subculture that made you want to anchor a film in it?
ものすごく簡単な理由が一つあって、僕の友人に本当に転売をやっている男がいるんです。で、転売っていうとなんか、 日本では非常にちょっと悪い犯罪のようなイメージがあるんですが、その本当に転売やってる男は全くそういう人間ではなくて、もう生活のために、会社で働いたりするのがすごい苦手な男なので、どうやって、生きていくかっていうので、たどり着いたのが、なるべく安く物を仕入れて、少しでも高く売るという、非常に真っ当にその仕事をやっているなというのを知っているので、この職業って、危険とも隣り合わせなんですけども、とっても今日的で面白いなと思ったのがきっかけでした。
I actually have a very simple answer for this, and it's that I actually have a friend, a man who is a reseller by profession. I think in Japan, the idea of being a reseller on the internet, some people have this idea that it's actually kind of a criminal activity. But in knowing this friend who is a reseller over the internet, he's just someone who isn't really suited for instance, a corporate job, and is just doing it to make his livelihood. That he needs to buy things for very cheap and then try to sell them for a profit. And so he's has this very direct relationship to this profession, even though it's something that kind of seems dangerous. I thought it would be interesting to anchor my film in this idea.
You've moved fluidly through many genres over your career, and I know you've said that this film was born in part out of wanting to make an action film, but that is there are a lot of challenges to setting an action film in contemporary Japan. I was wondering if you could tell us a bit about why there are what those challenges are and how you settled on making an action film featuring a lot of people who have no direct experience with violence.
はい。これはそうですね。あの、アクションに限らないんですけれども、僕はいろんな映画が好きで、たくさん今まで見てきました。だから、特にジャンル映画は大好きです。アクションも好きですし、ホラー映画も大好きですし、もちろん時にはミュージカルであったり、コメディであったりも、いろんな映画が好きです。ただ、それを現代の日本でどうやって作るのかというのにも、昔から散々それで苦労してきました。そこまでまず訳してもらえますか？
I think I have a love for all kinds of films, and I have an interest in all the genres. For instance, I'm interested in action films, horror films, even at times musicals or comedies. I just love all types of films. However, I've felt that it's been a challenge to think about how to translate these genres into the setting of contemporary Japan.
あの、ただ、アメリカ映画は本当にそういうジャンル映画を作るのが昔から本当にうまいなと、かねがね思っております。逆に言うとアメリカ映画こそ、この映画のジャンルを確立した、のであろうと思っております。だからアメリカはなんであんなにうまくいくんだろうといつも羨ましく、見ているんですが、日本だと、えーっと、いろんな理由があるんですね。わかりやすい対立みたいなものがなかなか作りづらいとか、そうですね。まず、映画を作る予算が少ないとかですね。様々な理由があるんですが、あ少なくとも現代の日本のリアリズムを追求していくと、アクションはもちろんホラーでもミュージカルでも、そういうアメリカ映画が得意としているジャンルにはもう絶対にたどり着けないというのが、僕には分かっております。また、訳してもらえますか？
Right. Hi. So I think of American films as being very good at approaching different film genres. In fact, I think that maybe American films have single-handedly created many of these genres, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about and feeling very envious towards American films for being so good at approaching these genres. As for Japan, I think that there are many reasons why making a genre film is difficult. For instance, it's very hard to establish a very clear-cut or legible type of conflict. There's also issues of budgets within the film industry. And so to try to create as I'm trying to explore realism within contemporary Japan, I especially through the genres of something like action or horror or musical, I've always thought it would be impossible to kind of reach the level of a genre film made in America.
あの、そんなにリアリズムにこだわるなら、もう、ジャンルを捨ててですね、最後までリアリズムで、押し通せば、それはそれで、優れた作品になるだろうということはわかるんですが、まあ、どうしてもやはり、ジャンル映画が好きで、まあ、僕にとってジャンル映画というのはイコール映画そのものなんですね。だから、リアルから始まるんですけど、最終的にはやはり映画の世界、映画だけが可能な表現にたどり着きたいっていうのがまあ僕の昔からの夢で、まあ未だに苦労してそれを続けているという感じです。もうあるいは最初からもうこれファンタジー、リアルを捨てて、もうファンタジーのようにしてしまえば、あるいはもう主人公を、まあ、ヤクザとかですね、兵隊とか、まあ特殊な人にしてしまえば、日本でもアクションとか、ある種のジャンルは成立するのかもしれませんが、それは僕にとってはあまりリアルではないんですね。だから、あの、日本の現実も映したいし、映画でもありたいっていう、この矛盾したものがいつも僕の映画の中にあって、あの、クラウドもまさにそんなような映画になってしまったなと。なんでアメリカ映画のようにうまくいかないんだろう。まあ、でもこれが日本の現実、僕が置かれている現実なんだと、それを認めて、作っていった。まあそんな感じでした。
I think that if I were to just make a film that was just exploring realism, and not trying to approach genre at all, then of course I think that a good film is possible. But the truth is that I just simply love genre films. In fact, I think of genre films as the epitome of filmmaking, something that starts from the real, but then approaches a world that can only be built through filmmaking. It's always been my dream to approach films that way, and something that I've been challenging myself towards throughout my career. So if I approach this film as simply fantasy and perhaps cast my protagonist as a yakuza or a soldier or some kind of special role, then perhaps an action film would be easy to make. But that's lacking in that sense of the real that I'm interested in. So there is this conflict within me that I want to depict Japan truthfully, Japan, the real of Japan, but I also want to create a film that is fiction, that is steeped in the world of filmmaking, and I think that that conflict is very apparent in this world in this film Cloud. Um, it's filled with my frustrations of not being able to make a genre film in the way that American films are made, but it is a reflection of the reality that I live.
I was curious because this is a thriller, but I was curious how much you also see it as a very dark comedy because there is something kind of wonderfully absurd about every person that Ryosuke has wronged, from people he has ripped off online to the girlfriend he neglected, coming to kill him at the end.
はい。そう見ていただいて、一向に構わないと思います。ただ、最初からコメディを作ろうとしたわけではありません。まあ、さっき言いましたように、日本で現実に存在しそうな人が、まあ、普通は絶対やらない、ああいう、まあ、激しい銃撃戦とかですね、ああいうことをやるとなると、まあ、かっこよくスマートにやるわけがないので、みんな、初めてやるようなことをおどおどしながらやるわけですから、まあ、客観的に見ればそれは非常におかしな、非常に間抜けな姿になるだろうと思います。あくまで、リアルにやったらこんな感じになるんじゃないかなということで、やったらああなってしまいました。
I don't mind that interpretation at all, but I didn't intend to make a comedy. I wanted to depict people that might actually exist in reality, that end up in a situation like a gunfight. And if that were to happen in reality, there's no way that they could shoot a gun while looking very cool. It's their first time, and so they'd be filled with that kind of hesitation. And as a result, it makes sense that they might look foolish or comedic. But it is that I was trying to depict a kind of realistic idea of regular people ending up in this kind of situation.
The film does have one character who feels a bit larger than life, though we don't see it at first, which is the character of Sano, the local assistant who Ryosuke hires. And I wanted to ask about how you chose to portray that character who starts off, who is very even-keeled throughout, in a way that by the end feels almost demonic.
はい。まあ、おっしゃる通り、彼だけが、まあ、最初は、普通の人間のように見えて、だんだん、特別な、そういう意味では、少しファンタジックな、設定になっていっているというふうに、考えています。あの彼は何者かっていうのを説明するのも、まあ説明しようとすれば、まあいろいろできるんですけども、物語の中でやっている役割ははっきりしていて、彼はまあ、ズバリ悪魔、人間の欲望と引き換欲望を叶えてやると引き換えに、魂を持っていくという、まあ、西洋で、古典的に、何度も登場している、まあ、悪魔だと思っていただければ分かりやすいかなと思います。
Yes, it's exactly as you said that starts out as an ordinary person, but slowly becomes more special or even kind of fantastic. And I think that it's a little difficult to explain who he is, although I could give it a try. But his role in the narrative and his role in this movie is very clear. He is the devil. He is someone who, in exchange for granting people's wishes or their desires takes a bit of their soul. So he is kind of modeled after this very Western idea of a demonic presence.
Cloud also brought to mind for me another earlier film of yours, Bright Future, with its two kind of disaffected factory workers. And I was curious if you saw the film, given how many of the characters in it, including the main character, just don't see a place for themselves kind of in a traditional career path. If you saw this as a film about people who had lost faith in the kind of typical structures that they are supposed to pursue to find a successful future.
はい。よくそれに気づきましたね。まあ、本当に僕の映画、そんなにたくさん見ていただけて、ブライトフューチャーまで見ていただけてるっていうのは大変嬉しいことです。あの、あんまり誰にも言ってないんですけど、いや、そうなんですよ。どっかで、ブライト、これ全然意識しなかったんですけど、作ってる途中で、この設定、主人公の設定、すごく明るい未来に似ているなと、途中で僕も実は気づきました。
I'm just so happy that you noticed that. And I'm also just so happy that you even watched so many of my films, including something like Bright Future. I hadn't really even said this to anyone, and it certainly wasn't something that was intended. But as I was working on the film, I slowly started to realize that, wow, the protagonists' backgrounds and stories are so similar between Cloud and Bright Future.
あの、すみません。ちゃんと答えられないんですけど、僕もなんで似ているのは、自分でも自覚したんですけど、どうしてなのかっていうはっきりした答えはないんですが、ただ、一つ言えるとしたら、僕、これまでたくさんいろんな映画撮ってますけども、たった一人で、まあ、若い男が、まあ、生きている。そこの状況からスタートする映画ってそんなに多くないんですね。大抵、まあ、夫婦であったり、家族であったり、あの、そういう誰か、 一緒に住んでいる相手がいて、っていう設定は多いんですけれども、まあ、基本的に一人で生きている。まあ、今回も恋人はいますけども、完全に一応孤独に一人に生活しているという設定でした。そういう若い人間は、まあ、ブライトフューチャーもまさにそうで、そういう主人公は何か、まあ、社会とどうつながってるんだろうといったときに、まあ、一方で、まあ、社会を代表する、まあ、大人。それは、まあ、会社の社長だったりするんですけど、その自分を非常に可愛がってくれる、会社の社長のようなものと、どういう関係にあるんだろうと、自然に考えていくと、まあ、ブライトフューチャーとクラウドが、まあ、すごい非常に似てきてしまったというのは、感じました。つまり、全くそういうものと相対して受け入れないということですね。自分を可愛がってくれる会社の上司と、可愛がってくれているにもかかわらず、全くそれと、相対してしまう。その状況は、クラウドとブライトフューチャーはそっくりだと、自分でも感じています。
I'm not sure I can answer this question well because although I realize the similarities between the two films, I don't can't quite explain why. I've made lots of different kinds of films, but there are very few that feature a young man that is completely isolated. I think that there aren't many films that start out with that kind of setting at all. It's oftentimes a married couple or a family, certainly people that live with other people. That's kind of the starting point for most films. But as for the character in Cloud, he's very alone, despite the fact that he has a girlfriend. He still lives this isolated life. And Bright Future features protagonists that are exactly the same way. Now, what is the connection between these isolated men and society? uh, in these films, there are, they do receive kind of the love or affection of someone that is the archetype of, the grown person or the adult in society, which is the boss of their company. That's something that's similar between the two films as well. But also, it's that these young men cannot accept the affection or love from their elder or from the boss at their company. So that's something that I also noticed is very similar.
I think we have time for maybe one or two questions from the audience if we have some. If you do, raise your hand and we'll get a microphone to you so that the translator can hear. Over there in the third row.
Thank you, Mr. Kurosawa, for being here. Um, my question, maybe it seems very simple to you, but I noticed that in the second half, when you had all of these converging action, different threads, all kind of coming to a showdown, usually conventionally, you would start speeding up the cross-cutting in order to increase the intensity. But I noticed you didn't make that choice. You almost seemed to do the opposite, where the pace would be deliberately slower to the point where there were sequences where I was less kind of on edge and more almost like annoyed at the characters for taking longer than I would expect. And I wonder, is that intentional or am I reading it correctly? And also, I'm just curious more generally, your use of speed and tempo. Like, is it instinctive? Do you come in with a concept in your head? Do you kind of graph it out, or is it just all by feel?
はい。まあ、アクション映画を気持ちのいいアクション映画を作るのは非常に難しいなというのが、そう簡単ではないということが、まずやってみて、わかりました。なかなか難しかったですね。あのただ、あの見てお分かりかと思うんですけども、アクション映画のようにしたかったと言いながら、やはり、そういうアクション的なことが起こる前の現実とそれはつながっていて、突如、 全く違う世界が繰り広げられるわけではないと考えていました。アクションシーンになったからいきなり編集の仕方が変わってしまうっていうのは何か違うだろうと。同じような、撮っているこちらは、同じように、いつも同じ態度で、日常生活であろうが、ガンアクションであろうが、同じようにスタンスで撮ろうというのが一つのコンセプトでした。ですから、お気づきかと思いますが、アクション的なものが始まるんですけれども、わかりやすい音楽はほとんど入れませんでした。音楽を入れてしまえば、多分、ここは、気持ちのいいアクションなんだな。編集が少々遅くても、非常にこう、速いテンポの曲を、音楽を入れれば、ここは、速いテンポのシーンなんだと思ったかもしれませんが、それはやめました。現実の部分も、後半のアクションの部分も、これは一つながり、主人公の身に起こった同じ出来事なのだ。というふうに、見ていただければ嬉しいなと思って、こうなってしまいました。でも本当にアクションは難しかったです。
Um, Something that I learned in making this film is that it's very hard to make a satisfying action film. It's not easy at all. I'm sure that you noticed, but even though this is supposed to be an action film, the way that reality is depicted in the first half is the same way that I wanted to approach depicting the action of the second half. I don't really think that just because the action begins, that suddenly it's a completely new world and that I could approach it completely differently, or that I should edit the action sequences in a way that's different from the first half, the more ordinary parts of life. I wanted to approach the editing in completely the same way, whether it's daily life or gun action. That was something that was a concept from the beginning of the movie. I also am sure that you noticed, but once the action begins, I didn't add any kind of suspenseful music. I think that if I had added some type of music, that even if the editing was slower, you would still see that and think, oh, this is a satisfying action sequence and it has a fast tempo. But that's something that I purposely avoided. I wanted to make sure to depict that reality and the action as happening to the protagonist in the same way. It's something that he's going through. But yes, making an action film is very hard.
We are unfortunately out of time. Can I get another round of applause, please, for Kiyoshi Kurosawa?